Welcome back to the Wish House. I'm Cris Spinner, and I'm wrapping up 1,000 Miles, my limited series, my journey, actually my son Anthony and my journey with autism. I like to say how autism impacted our lives and how we impacted autism's life. And if you've just come into the story, I recommend you go back and watch or listen to the previous 7 episodes. It was a new normal for me, a very uncomfortable, stress-filled, difficult, heartbreaking normal, but it had become ours. Anthony was in crisis, and me too. And Steve was the anchor, holding it all together in my personal life. And of course, our friends and our community and our team of educators and doctors and therapists and my family when they could. But I was the primary holder downer at the fort, and the one who came to realize that Anthony needed more, much more, than I could provide. I needed something really out of the ordinary. I needed something that could help on a monumental level in giving Anthony the quality of life he deserves. The quality of life everyone deserves. I needed a miracle. And I found it. After soul searching and researching, I made a call to a place, a community of care, to see if it were possible for Anthony to live and learn there. It was quite an extraordinary place, filled with some of the best minds, researching some of the best practices, creating some of the best programming in a farm-based community where food is medicine. A place that embodied everything I'd always believed surrounding Anthony's care, treatment, programming, education, and an overall outlook on possibility. And I knew in my heart of hearts that as difficult as it would be to have Anthony's full-time, everyday care be turned over to other people I didn't even know, I knew it was the right thing to do. And so we applied, and we were given a green light. I went to visit, first time with my good friend Nadine, second time with Steve and Anthony and Nadine, and the third time by myself. And then it was time to get the permission from my school district and wait for an opening in the care community. I had to work with the school district for placement in an outside community, and that can be sometimes very daunting. And other times it can go very smoothly, but as my life always goes, I got the very daunting experience. I'm not including or sharing of that experience in this story, but suffice to say it held us up a good 5 months before we could proceed. More stress. But once our train was back on track, we were simply waiting for an opening at the community. Times were still rough. We were now 2.5 years in the crisis. Things were very rigid at home, much of the same, and the stress was visibly wearing on me. And preparing for Anthony to go live at the community, we decided to use the strategy of, you're going to college. Anthony was almost 18 now, and he had watched my nieces go off to college. And he had an understanding that college was a school and a place where you lived. He also understood that I didn't live with my mother anymore, and so now it was time for him, as an adult, not to live with his mother. But he knew I would be there every weekend, and he knew I would talk to him on the phone every night, and he knew I would spend every moment of time I could with him. Anthony, even in those difficult times, knew I was there for him, and I think that foundation is what made his early days out of the house very successful. We got a call in the late summer of 2013 that a place for Anthony was going to be available. Now, here's how it worked in those days. You had to have everything packed and ready to go. You had to be packed and ready because when the call comes, you really have about 24 hours to get in the car, move in. You have to drop everything and go. So we had our things packed from the end of August, which was a little bit stressful for Anthony because there was no specific date I could give him. Because the last 2 months were very difficult. But in October, mid-October, I got the call. Steve and I packed up the car and with Anthony in tow, embarked on the most unknown chapter for me thus far. We spent 2 days participating in appointments and intakes, and on the afternoon of the second day, I hugged Anthony and told him I would return on the weekend, and I left him in his nicely decorated room with his new comforter, with very kind people, but strangers. They were all strangers. My heart was breaking, and I was scared, and I was worried, but I was certain I had made the right decision, all at the same time. Anthony was 18, and he was beginning a brand new journey all by himself. One of the directors told me after a couple of weeks that she hadn't really seen a young man that acclimated that easily to new surroundings in many years. And I really felt that was because Anthony knew I was there. Maybe not physically, but Anthony and I are connected, a team established 1995. And although the first years presented struggles, Anthony quickly began to thrive. They were able to take some of the medications out of his cocktail, as we call it. His eating palate opened up in leaps and bounds. He was trying all different kinds of foods. And because they have a renowned food program, his weight began to drop and his good health increased quickly and remarkably. I was told early on that he would be receiving his adult services in this community if we would agree to that. Because in those days, up until a child was age 21, they were considered pediatric. And once you turned 22, you were an adult. And so your adult services changed. Many people don't stay in those earlier care communities and move to others. But I was told early on that they would like him to remain and receive his adult programming there. And when they asked me if I would agree, I don't even know if agree is the right word. It was more like screaming and crying for me. So Anthony was transferred out of his school program early on and into a work program where he flourished. And I talked to him every day, saw him every weekend, and spent much time in his neck of the woods during my school vacation. Now that's where the vacation perks of teachers come in. The move into the adult community had Anthony leaving his pediatric home, moving into a new adult home, where we found that each home is run differently, and the work program is also different. But everything is tailored to the needs of the individual. Since Anthony's been in the adult program, he's had 3 different homes and 3 different programs, and where he is presently the 3rd. It took us 2 experiences to find the exact right fit. Reminds me of the Goldilocks story. You know, it's too cold, it's too hot, it's just right. We're in the just right. Now, Anthony lives with friends, a full-time 24/7 staff, and has incredibly meaningful work, which includes working in greenhouse, setting up for planting, working with herbs, making tea, and producing lip balm, as well as other jobs. When Anthony first moved into the community, I knew that eventually I would live in the area as well. And in 2017, I bought a small home quite near to where Anthony lives. My first home. I'd always wanted that in my life. Didn't come until I was 60. See, belief. I knew I would eventually retire and move there. So in 2019, I did just that. For the first 9 years that Anthony was in his new community, I couldn't take Anthony out or take Anthony home without one-on-one aid support. So one of the reasons that I can't take Anthony into restaurants or other places on my own, still to this day, is because I can't go into the restroom with him. I could never send him into a public bathroom by himself. He couldn't navigate that. So I always need a male with me when we go out. But in those days, even taking Anthony home to spend time was a challenge. He was still quite behavioral, and I was not able to handle what might happen. So even for the holidays, Anthony would stay overnight. I would ask hired support to stay a little extra. So we would have people with us all day. Then Anthony would go to bed, and then I would say, Well, of course, I'm going to pay you a couple extra hours, but if you could just stay and have coffee and cake and you can watch TV. I was a little worried about Anthony getting up in the night and me having to deal with a behavior. So we always had somebody stay an hour or two extra and then return at the crack of dawn the next morning. So if Anthony was going to get up around 7, I had somebody there at 5 a.m. I was up making coffee, serving coffee, cake, whatever I had to do to keep the situation easy for us. But as I've said before, every time somebody comes to work for us, they become family. And that's the way it's always been for us. And so it worked. But as the years have gone on and Anthony is able to strategize more and has gotten a little stronger in his emotions, I can take Anthony home now non-supported. In the beginning, we started with just coming home for lunch, a couple hours non-supported, and then we graduated to an afternoon and then a full day. And now Anthony stays for holidays, one weekend a month, and all other day visits without support. And that's been for 3 years. Now, could something happen again that could trigger an episode in the home? Absolutely. Are some days easier for Anthony than others? Absolutely. Does Anthony still present challenges? Absolutely. But I have a strong team and best practices and probably a little luck and an extra blessing. And we have been very successful. At present, we're in a very successful stretch. Anything can happen at any time, but isn't that everyone's life as well? Anthony's now 30. And this decision, the scariest decision that I made, turned out to be the best decision. And that's kind of the way my life has unfolded. Of all of the scary decisions I've ever made, they always turn out to be the best decisions. And yes, it takes a village. It's always taken a village. It continues to take a village. And I'm grateful every single day that the village that we are living in now is one of the best villages on the planet. And Anthony continues to play sports, go to concerts, attend parties. He's the narrator for the community musical performance. And yesterday, coincidentally, I got to see that reimagined care in action. There he was reading a poem to open the show. Not watered down in language, just cut down in length. Taking direction, speaking clearly in front of a green screen where they're going to add some special effects for the actual performance. I had a million different emotions running through my head while I was sitting there. I thought of the neurologist that told me years ago he probably wouldn't speak and not to get my hopes up. And I thought of him in two different ways. Yeah, there was a little bit of a mommy's, I told you so. But there was also a see with the right strategies, the right programmings, our kids can succeed. Small steps, big steps, but they're all steps. As I often say, this is our story, one story, but it contains real possibility and intention, success and hope. And on the reading track, Anthony Zoom reads books to houses now, creating story times. We're opening a YouTube channel for him called Storytime with Mr. Spinner. He records children's stories, little board book stories, in a digital studio in front of a green screen, which eventually turns into the words from pages and pictures from the books that he's reading. He's gone to the prom.